very good afternoon to everybody. Dr. Cheah, Chairman of the HCIS Board, Mr. Vincent Koh, Chairman of the School Management Committee, board members, senior management, school management members, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, parents, staff of the school, both acad and non-acad staff, and students. Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. I'm a bit worried that Principal Lee may regret inviting me because I've not given a lecture for some time, so this may drag on a little bit, but I'll try my best to keep it short. Now, Hwa Chong has a spirit, 自强不息. Let me talk a little bit more about what it translates into in language that is probably more pertinent to today's context. So I'd like to talk about learning for life and, very importantly, learning as life. This outline, you notice I'm like giving a lecture style with all the sort, but don't worry, only 6 slides. I talk a little bit about what I meant by 60-year curriculum, quite importantly, how you prepare for learning, and then how to make the journey meaningful. And I hope that this sharing with students here would make a bit of difference to their learning journey, both in the school and later on in life. Now, learning has 2 broad definitions as learning for life. First is about really the process of learning. That means, you pick up every day, we learn about something new. Every day you learn about something that enhances our understanding of the world a little bit. It's part of the process. But also learning for life also in a sense that relates to learning as a living, that we learn in order to live well. I don't mean just earning lots of money. I also mean learning to adapt to a new environment, adjusting, and building up the experience that bring us through our life collectively. Now, what I said there is not new, but given today's context, the world that we are in, it's increasingly important to be conscious of the learning process. Quite often we just go through life, we learn, we don't even call it learning, we just pick things up and then adjust and all that. But I think because of the pace of changes, it becomes important that we become more deliberate, more conscious, and able to put it together in a more efficient way. But perhaps very importantly, I also like to talk about learning as life. What I mean by learning as life is really the attitude you take towards life itself, and that learning become part and parcel of it. I'd just like to highlight Richard Feynman. Those who in physics will know who I'm talking about. Highly inspirational figure. He wrote the famous Feynman lecture series of physics, written in a way that doesn't compromise the physics principle and yet allow the layman a good appreciation of the topic at hand. So I encourage, especially physics students or those who are interested in physics, go and have a look at it and read it. Now, I mention him for a very simple reason, because from a very young age, he has been very curious about the world. Whatever he encounters, he wants to find out why, how it works, why it works this way. And that becomes part of his life, the attitude he takes to be, his learning journey. So learning as life reflects broadly an attitude you take and incorporating the learning aspect as being part and parcel of life. Now, today I had a chance to talk to some students before this segment. We talked a little bit about their career, what they want to be, and so on. For this purpose, let me just sketch out in my mind 3 broad categories of work that a new entrant into the workforce will likely have a choice. I'm not saying that if you choose one, you can't go to the other, or you don't do 3 altogether, but broadly, there are 3 broad categories. One is you work at the cutting edge. Cutting edge is like you're a rocket scientist. You're pushing knowledge frontier. You're inventing a cure for cancer. You're trying to figure out what dark matter really is. That kind of knowledge. Generally, people working in the space will be probably very small proportion. Maybe, depending on your definition, is maybe stretched from 0.1% to about maybe 2% or so, or 3% of the workforce. This is at the cutting edge. So exciting space can be very frustrating, but very meaningful and impactful once you get the knowledge up and out into the world. Second layer refers to what I call discipline-focused kind of career. My brother or my generation, and maybe a bit earlier, once if you're a civil engineer by training, you remain a civil engineer for more or less your entire working career. Perfectly respectable, it still exists, but probably not so pure as compared to what it used to be, where you learn something and you apply that learning, for the rest of your working career. So that space is still quite comfortable, but a lot of people will still end up in the space. But increasingly, you'll find that you need to work at the intersections where you need to take into a whole range of perspective. You need to take into account different things. Let me give an example. I have a group of students working in a village in Indonesia, along a river. So they have villagers staying on the banks of the river. Quite often, when you cook, when you eat, when you buy your bottled drinks, they don't have really rubbish collection, you just throw into a river. So the aim of the project at the start was to look at how do we, look at pollution, trying to clean out the river a little bit. But as I go into the space, this group of students found that it's a lot more complex than just cleaning up the river. Because as part of that cleaning up, you deny a small group of people their livelihood. That there's a group of people who will collect rubbish from each of the family, bring it to a collection center to be transported to a incinerator or filling site to treat the waste. So you affect their livelihood. You also affect the way in which the whole structure of the economic structure as well as the political structure within the village. A village, not very big, but still, there's certain structure that build it up. So increasingly, they found that whatever they do, someone will not be happy. And they cannot just look at it as an environmental issue. They also need to look at it as an economic issue, as a social issue, and very importantly, they need the science in to find the technology to address the thing. I highlight the example for a very simple reason. You'll notice that increasingly, when you move into a workspace, you'll find that you no longer only operate in one perspective or one area. You need to be able to operate across. So the general rule of thumb is that you need to be very good. You need to achieve strong cognitive understanding and depth in one discipline, and yet you need to be of sufficient level of understanding across maybe 2 or 3 more disciplines, so you can bring those perspectives and integrate it together. Another simple example, you look at pollution near a bus stop. You don't just look at, the air quality in a bus stop. You also need to look at the psychology of the people around there, control of the flow of traffic, footfall, maybe even some of the data sciences, air quality treatment scientists will need to be brought in. So these 2 examples, I hope to illustrate to you that increasingly the kind of challenges, the kind of workspace that as a worker, as a part of the workforce you will be facing is increasingly more complex. So to do that, to get into that space, the universities in Singapore at least have already responded. Those who may not know will know soon that they increase the curriculum space for what we call transferable life skills, because they figured that I need to treat my learning and front load a set of skill set that will stand them well for the rest of their life. And these are called transferable life skills, things like learning how to learn, things like resilience, things like collaboration, working with people, language capability, communication, a social awareness, and so on. So there's a range of that. So you can no longer think about a curriculum as only a 4-year curriculum. You got to think about it as a 60-year curriculum. My definition is from the point you enter higher education, whether you start your poly work or your A-level or your university program, you got to treat the learning to continue for another at least 60 years, if not longer. So the universities are beginning to broaden the undergraduate program in terms of transferable life skills, give it more space, and then for disciplinary training, you need to do enough so that you can start. But then you got to relearn and learn as you go along. In some discipline, whatever you learn in year 1, you probably need to relearn by the time you get to year 4. And some a bit more stable. So it varies depending on what you do, but the general understanding is that we can no longer treat learning as a complete whole in the formal learning space, and you got to need to move into the continuing education and technology space. So likelihood, the learning space will be things that stretches your value, skills, and knowledge in a T-shaped form, with good foundational life skills, good cognitive understanding, with good depth in a discipline, and then you need a spread of understanding across that. So that is what I meant by a 60-year curriculum that I think affect all of us. Now, how do you prepare for learning? There are 2 things you need to bear in mind: purpose and then learn to learn. Purpose is very important. Purpose is where it's not just about knowing what you want, because purpose enables you to plan. When my son was in primary school, I think about primary 5, we have this parent-child conversation, right? You ask your kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? So he very proudly and without hesitation said, I want to play football for Manchester United. You see, it's very tough for me because I'm a Liverpool supporting parent. But I said, never mind, let's sit down and plan, okay? You want to play football, fine. He was year-end kid, December kid, so kind of small. So I said, okay, yeah, small, that's a bit of disadvantage. But you have 2 main advantages. One, he was a bit brave, he was quite brave. And second, he's left-footed. So, that is a bit rare in the football team. So he learned how to tackle and get out of the tackle. He actually ran quite fast. He may be a bit smaller in size, but maybe good muscle, and he can really sprint quite well. So you can imagine, the opposition coming at him, he will just slide in quite bravely, take the ball away, bordering on yellow card offense, but he got away with it most of the time. So much so that, it became an important part of the team. So he made it into the school team. He did quite well. Of course, his purpose in life changed after that. My point is not to talk about his journey per se, but to illustrate that once you have a purpose, you can plan what to do about it. This morning, I talked to some students, and some of them want to be neurosurgeon, some want to be plastic surgeon, architect, and so on. Once you are clear, then you got to figure out what you need to do to get there. Now, finding a purpose is not easy. Some find it in minutes, some hours, some days, some months. Some need a few decades to figure out. But it's also evolving. It's not something that once I decide in primary school I will do this, I'll do that for life. Because it will change as your understanding of the world change, as your context change, and you vary. But the same principle apply. I need a purpose so that I understand how I plan my time, how I plan my approach, so that I can carry out the plan, and then the rest, we got to leave it to fate. Now, learn to learn is important. Again, here only 3 points I want to highlight. balance of perspective. If you read the New York Times, you will get a certain view of the world. You read Fox News, you get a different perspective of the world. Same event, different interpretation. But if you're in social space, it's even worse, because you tend to get into a space where you only talk to people of like-minded perspective. It's very dangerous. I get into some of the blog spaces. I know I'm different generation. I still talk about Facebook, right? Now it's TikTok and Instagram. But you get to some of these spaces, you raise certain idea. If you do not fall into the broad mind share of that space, you get put out very quickly. In fact, some of the time very violently in a verbal sense. Because there is a place where social media is concerned, that it forms a bit of a bubble around your perspective, your worldview, and they are mutually reinforcing. You get to know something really well, very deeply, but you forget there are other things outside that is very different. I talked about perspective earlier on, that when you work into an intersection where you need to take into account other people's viewpoint, it's increasingly important that that happens. Otherwise, if you get locked down in your own silo spaces, it becomes very difficult. And in today's age where the social media actually does rewire our brain, literally rewire our brain somewhat, we got to be very careful and be more deliberate in building up that range of perspective. It's not easy. It's very difficult for a single individual to read widely. There's a video that's been done by a photojournalist about a war, not about war, about an incident in a different country. I won't talk too much about that. Basically showing that Group A attacked Group B. But the video, when it was presented to the world, was Group B attacking Group A. But without being able to read a bit more and expand your range of understanding, your worldview will be B attack A, and not the truth that is A attack B. This is a real case that happened only 1-2 years back. The danger is really this: when the broad media talk about a certain event, is headline. When they correct the perspective of event, is page 8 or page 9, somewhere in the middle that you probably miss out. So quite often it helps to form our perspective. But for individual to figure out all these things, very tough. But for individual to build a network of friends, a network that is broad enough range, is important. Now, I spend some time on this for a very simple reason, because the world is getting increasingly quite dichotomous. And it's important that we learn to listen to each other, build up the understanding, so that different perspectives are built into place in a meaningful, impactful, and increasingly urgent way. So developing a balance of perspective for young learners, I will say that is extremely important. Now, self-directed and collaborative learning, because when you go out, you need to be self-directed in the sense that you need to figure out what you want, how you monitor your progress, very importantly, a plan that you can execute. Collaborative learning is increasingly more important because you need to really, you cannot work alone anymore. And collaborative learning requires you to monitor your group processes, active listening, and being able to share your perspective in a way that can engage your listener, for example. So these two set of skills, I would say, are very important. However, the third one, reflective practitioner, is crucial. There's a director I remember some time back. This series, TV series, right? Korean drama and all that. They produce it in a very tight schedule. They will produce it this week, and then maybe it's screened next week or 2 weeks later. So this fairly well-known director of TV series, every time he finish an episode, he will go back home, watch it repeatedly for hours. When asked why did he do that, you just finished your production, why do you do that? His answer was very simple. I want to figure out what I can do better the next time. He said, no matter that he had 20 years experience, he said that he will bound to find something he can improve on. So reflective practitioner basically means that you think about what you do, you think critically about what you can do the next time that you can make it better. That is reflective practitioner. So, 前知山摇, okay, basically talk about somebody who will reflect during the daytime, who work very hard during the day, reflect at night, and then you don't have to worry. Okay, I leave it to you to read a bit more about the backstory. So, making a meaningful journey. Here, as I shared with my group earlier on, you are in a space and a period of your life that you would have common experiences, you would be able to struggle through together. And I urge you to spend time to make friends. Spend your time wisely, okay? Not too many computer games perhaps, or social media. But make friends, very importantly, build community, because this friendship, this community will last you a lifetime, and they can be very, very meaningful. It does make a difference. But what I meant by this is that how do you spend your life? Again, there's a research study. In fact, I was just reading a book only yesterday that talked about the generation of this thing called glucocorticoids, that basically when you do something altruistically, you help someone, you feel good about it. Scientifically shown to be the case. So they also conducted this interview about people literally towards the end of their life, near the last breath, and say, hey, what is your proudest moment? Majority of them say that their proudest moment is when they make a difference to somebody's life. So I urge you that be generous with your time, with your resources, with your learning. Make a difference. It doesn't mean they make a difference to thousands, hundreds of thousands. Even one life at a time is good enough. So make an effort to make a difference, and it has to be positive. Okay, make a positive difference to somebody's life. Some years back, MOE introduced a Tech 9 Teach Less, Learn More. For those teachers, you may know this, or the older generation may remember this. In today's in today's social media context, quite often we are very quick to judge. We are very impatient. So I urge you, if nothing else, to remember to judge less, help more. And I leave you with a final quote that I hope that will help you to frame your way in which you approach the world for the young graduating student or learners among us. 梦想和实现的区别是坚信不疑，不可能到可能的距离是绝不放弃。With that, I'd like to congratulate the school for achieving another series, another year of very good work, and thanks in no small part to the school leadership, the school teaching staff, and very importantly also the school administration staff. So thank you very much for having me today.